Hi, I'm Brooke Mabry. I'm a member on the professional learning team at NWEA. Thanks for joining us for our next video in the series, Empowering Students as Independent Learners. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you know when our newest videos release in this series. Today's session is a continuation where we're looking at how do students build their self-management, self-direction, critical thinking skills to really get empowered as independent learners. So let me introduce today's learning targets and success criteria. This really helps us anchor around what we're trying to accomplish during this video and gives you some success criteria by which to measure your learning and progress toward our learning outcome. So I want you to be able to think about how you engage students in a supportive process of building their critical thinking skills that really empower them to engage in positive self-management and self-direction. How will you know that you're getting close to achieving this particular learning? Well, based on what we're going to do in today's video, I want you to be able to identify the benefits of critical thinking, particularly those that are in supportive metacognition, mindfulness, and self-direction. Then I want you to be able to describe a concrete process to support your students developing those critical thinking skills so that they are engaging in more self-direction and self-management. And then in the long run, I want you to start evaluating how often are you empowering students to engage in the kind of metacognitive and mindfulness activities that help them really take charge of themselves through your own lesson design and through your cognitive coaching for students. So let's jump in today and start thinking about why do we want to engage in mindfulness and metacognition, two critical thinking skills that I want us to think about in relationship to self-management and self-direction. Well, what we know from the research is that intelligence is not the same thing as critical thinking, and the difference between the two really matters. While the advantages of intelligence are undeniable, we know that it's powerful, but it also, intelligence has its limits in terms of what can be accomplished. So let's talk a little bit about that. So some of the advantages of intelligence. We know that people who have really high IQs are more likely to get better grades, to go farther in school, to be successful in the workplace, and also less likely to get in trouble or to commit crimes. But intelligence is not a good predictor of other positive life outcomes, things like well-being and longevity, life satisfaction. But those people who engage in critical thinking and have high critical thinking capacity do actually have a stronger positive correlation with longevity and well-being. In fact, some recent research shows us that people who are engaged in regular critical thinking activities and who really develop those critical thinking skills experience fewer typical negative life events. And what we're talking about in domains like academics, in health, in their legal situations, in their financial situations, in their interpersonal situations. So critical thinking is not a skill that's just for school. It's a life skill that really impacts a range of the kinds of activities and life events that we engage in as humans. I was particularly intrigued by a recent Scientific American article that I read. The title was, "Why Do Smart People Do Foolish Things?" And a researcher really shared some of the findings around people who have high IQ and people who have high critical thinking capacity. And so the research was really designed to look at who experiences fewer of those negative life events in those domains that we just talked about. What the research finds is that while both groups experience fewer than typical negative life events, it's critical thinkers who fare better. And why is this exciting? This is exciting because when you think about an intelligence quotient or your IQ, it's much harder to raise your IQ by focusing on explicit teaching. than it is to explicitly teach critical thinking skills. We know that there's an abundance of research out there that says critical thinking skills can be taught, and in fact, they can be improved over time. So for us as teachers, we really need to start elevating the conversation. Let's stop talking about why intelligence matters. Let's start talking about why critical thinking matters and start thinking about how we get those kinds of things into our lesson plans. So when we're talking about critical thinking, what we're really talking about is a collection of cognitive skills. It's a full package. There are a number of kinds of critical thinking involved in this collection that we're going to talk about. But these are the things that really allow us to think rationally in a goal-oriented perspective. And so that's really important because it's not just about thinking, it's about thinking for a certain outcome. As we engage in the activity for today, I want us to think about the critical thinking skill of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is really that state of mind that allows us to consider our present moment, to think more clearly about that present state or the situation that we're in, to focus on what's happening at this very moment, and it provides us an opportunity to change our experience. Mindfulness is often associated with creating calm, with creating clarity and focus. And I want to say that not only that, it's also about helping us bring awareness to what we're experiencing in the moment and then thinking of ways that we might change it. Another critical thinking skill that we're going to spend some time on today is metacognition. And of course, we all know that metacognition is really thinking about our thinking. This is allowing us to bring awareness to our thoughts and the patterns of thoughts that we're having so that we can impact and change those outcomes. Now, I'm going to argue that it's metacognition and mindfulness that really paves the way for us to build self-management skills. And so self-management, while some of the pieces that go into self-management are critical thinking skills, self-management is also about the ability to control our actions, our thoughts, and our feelings. So this is a little, while we're applying the critical thinking lens, this also controls some of the outcomes. And then the self-direction piece. The self-direction is really about independence. The ability to manage the learning task or to make a decision without the direct support of someone else. And so when we're thinking about what it is that we're trying to encourage in our students, in order for them to be successful outside of K-12 environments, in order for them to become what we call lifelong learners, we know that it's critical that we strengthen and help them develop their self-direction and their self-management skills. And so I'm going to share with you today a strategy that starts to bring awareness for students to help them tap into the mindfulness, to be metacognitive about where they are in their thinking, and then to take some different action moving forward. I like to call this strategy something really simple. It is pause, think, and act. And really, the necessity for this particular strategy came up after I had left the classroom. Really, I was already a consultant with NWEA on the professional learning team. My son was in 2nd grade, and we found that he was having some behavior issues at school. And his teacher reached out several times. We talked about a plan for him to be able to self-regulate better and to self-manage better. And so together, we sat down and started thinking about what are some specific and concrete strategies that we can use outside of discipline. We didn't, discipline wasn't working for him, number one, and discipline wasn't teaching him anything. So I developed this strategy for him to use when he was in 2nd grade. So we started using it both at home and in his classroom. And I'll describe the process for you, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we can incorporate this both at home and in school. So the first step of the strategy is to pause. And really, there are 2 questions that I want the learner to consider when they're pausing. So we start tapping into how am I feeling? Let's get into that affect. If you watched the previous video in this series on the 6 thinking hats, you'll know that this is the red hat. We're putting on that red hat to tap into our emotions. And then we start to dig into what am I thinking and what am I doing? That might be the blue hat, where we're really thinking about our processes. and the white hat, where we're thinking just about the facts. So check out that video if you want to tune in and get a few more things that'll help you develop students' critical thinking skills. So we're going to pause and consider how we're feeling and what we're doing or thinking. The thinking that we're going to do is to tap into, what are the expectations for me in this situation? What are the desired outcomes that I have that I'm wanting to achieve? And then really, what kind of thinking and doing should I be engaging in relative to those outcomes and desired expectations? And then as you start to get into the action phase, this is where we're going to think about, what am I going to do differently and how will I do it? And then I take the action to do what I come up with. So this is a really structured process where students are tapping into and thinking about how they're feeling, bringing that awareness through mindfulness. They're bringing the metacognition to start thinking about, what are my thoughts and my actions right now, and how are those aligning to the desired outcomes and expectations that I have for myself or other people have for me. And then if I'm out of alignment, how can I get into alignment through, and then take that action? So I have a couple resources for you. I've already shared this one. This is a template where we can have students engage in the process. When my son was in 2nd grade, he drew rather than write what he was feeling, what he was thinking, what he was doing, how he was going to act differently. Of course, when we use this strategy at home, we facilitated by coaching and asking questions and just him sharing verbally. If you're working with older students, of course, we want you to scale this up, give them some more independence. They're welcome to use this form. Eventually, they won't need the form, and I'll share an example of that later. What you'll also find in the resources, I created these for Johnny's teachers to use with him. And so this is just a little reminder. Rather than giving him a verbal direction about engaging in the process, when teachers saw that he was behaving in ways that were not in alignment with their expectations, they would simply hold this up and show him as a reminder to pause, think, and act in a different way. Or sometimes they would place it on his desk. And he had a strategy for how he would use that. He would, his current 4th grade teacher created a station in his classroom where he could go and engage in the activity. So he could remove himself from his small group or wherever he was in the classroom, go to this dedicated space and engage in these mindfulness techniques. Of course, the pause, think, and act is just one of a number of activities that his teacher had him engage in. So I've described a behavior situation where this can be used really effectively to help students get into better alignment with how we want them to engage. This is something that we can continue to encourage, but I wanted to model a couple of ways that we might use it in our digital classrooms, which is really the genesis of these videos. We know that right now you're learning how to teach from home, your students are learning how to learn from home. We created this series as a way for you to help build that student empowerment piece for learning so that they're able to be successful without your direct support, and really to make it a little easier on their parents while they're at home all together trying to teach, learn, work. So I wanted to start with a couple of ideas. The first one is modeling. I think that modeling is always the best teacher. How can you model how you've done the pause, think, and act strategy in your life? I know that we use it so often in my house now that my son will see me in a particular instance and he'll say, "Hey, Mom, pause, think, and act." Or when I don't resolve something in an appropriate way, he has also said to me, "Mom, you know, if you'd used pause, think, and act, you might have had a different outcome." And one of those examples is just a couple weeks ago, I broke my very favorite coffee mug. And I did not pause and think about my actions before I had a tantrum in the kitchen. And it was a perfect opportunity for me to show my son that I'm still a learner and that we could engage together in applying the strategy retroactively. So that's another idea for you, is to have students think about an instance or a situation where they were really struggling recently, and if they had applied the pause, think, act strategy, how could it have turned out differently? So that's a great way for you to also model and help them think through the particular strategy before you ask them to use it. Like some of the other strategies that we've recommended in the series, I think journaling is really powerful at this point in time. If we wanted students to get an introduction to this particular strategy, you might have them journal about how they use it across their week. This could be for instances in their home lives, things that they're struggling with now in terms of being cooped up all the time. Just remind them that there are ways to use this that are beyond just the academic pieces. Another example that I thought about this is you could really have those journals come together in a class discussion. If you're holding your class discussions in a virtual format, you could have students share from their journals and really compare the situations and experiences that they've had applying the strategy. If you're not holding virtual meetings, if you could collect those entries from students in some way, you could make yourself a video that you could share back with them. A video where you share anonymously some of the examples that students have collected, and then provide some feedback and some reinforcement for the strategy. And don't forget to include one of yourself as well. For the brainstorming piece, it's very similar to what I was just describing. One thing that we can do is help students brainstorm when they might apply this strategy and how they might apply this strategy. So have them run through a series of events. I'll give you a particular example today. So a couple hours ago, my son took the dog out for a walk, and when he came back in, he had these little flowers. And he said, "Here, Mom, these are for you." And I was like, "Those are so pretty, Johnny. Where did they come from?" And he said, "I picked them." And immediately my mind went to, "Oh my gosh, whose flower bed did he get into?" And he said, "But don't worry. I really thought about it before I did it." He said, "There were 4 trees. And I figured because the trees were totally covered in all those flowers, it'd be okay for me to pick 2 of them." And so I was able to call out and say, "Oh my gosh, Johnny, look what strategy you were applying." And we were able to talk about the fact that he paused and what he was thinking about and then how he acted. And so when I asked him what he was thinking about in his pause, he was thinking about the fact that I love flowers and I love pink, and he wanted to pick those for me to brighten my day today, which warms my heart. But what's really exciting to me is that he also thought about expectations and what we have around not picking flowers out of our neighbors' gardens without asking. And so he considered and weighed the pros and cons and decided that because there were 4 trees with a ton of blossoms, that it was okay for him to pick these. And then he took his action. So that's just a simple example of the success criteria that we have for this strategy. Is for our son is we want to see that he's applying this without our direction, without our support. And so while that's a simple example, it's one that tells me that the strategy has become a natural part of his thinking and his behaving. And then we want to just continue to reinforce that and positively praise that this was a great opportunity for him to engage that way. Let's continue to apply that to other situations. I was also thinking about, we talked a little bit about the class discussion where you could engage students in sharing examples like we just had from my house today. But I'm also thinking about the fact that I support a number of parents in parent support groups, both in my community and externally. Since I was a teacher and a district administrator, and now I work external to schools, I do feel like one of the places that we often don't provide enough structured support is for our parents. And so we're always thinking about how can we engage our parents? How can we help them get the strategies and structures in place that we know are supportive of students? My son's school is hosting parent sessions, and they're sharing with us ways that we can help our children while we're at home with them. And I was thinking that this would be a great opportunity for you to host a parent session and say, "Hey, here's a very specific strategy that will be beneficial not only for your student academically, but also socially and emotionally in your home." Feel free to share this video with them. Share the resources that I'm providing in a link underneath our YouTube video in the description, and talk about ways that they can reinforce this kind of work at home. So those are a couple of the strategies that we might engage in. This is something that is good now for your digital classroom, but it's also something that's going to be really powerful when you have students back in your building. So don't tuck this one away too far. In fact, I did a Facebook Live video for my last, the school district that I worked for previously, and there were a lot of parents who came on there and said, oh my gosh, I'm going to share this strategy with some of the people who are on my Facebook page, because some of the adults in my life could use this pause, think before they act. So just a little joke there to lighten things up for you. But let's talk about student empowerment, why this is so important that we engage students in building those critical thinking skills and building that metacognition, that mindfulness, so that they can self-direct and self-manage. What we know is that students really need a really strong internal locus of control. And this is really a belief that they can impact and influence the things that happen to them. There's a belief that they can determine their outcome. And we know that the belief that our behaviors primarily determine what happens to us is really supported in research. That the more power we feel like we have over those things, the more power we actually exert over those things. And locus of control is really related to motivation. When we have higher sense of internal locus of control, we also have higher rates of motivation. And when students are given choice and voice and the ability to really take charge, then we know from research that they're three times more likely to engage in those kinds of behaviors. So we want to build that motivation by building that sense of internal locus of control. So part of the cognitive coaching that we really need to do when we're supporting students is helping them see how they do have influence. And this is about minimizing blame. This is about minimizing some of those external pieces that we think control our outcomes. We'll talk more about this when we get to our growth mindset video in this series, where we really start thinking about, how do we impact and change some of the pieces that are coming at us. Let's talk about self-efficacy. I've mentioned in other videos, one of my favorite researchers, John Hattie's work around visible learning. Self-efficacy is really high on the impact list for student achievement, and self-efficacy is really about confidence and belief. Confidence in my ability to achieve the success that I'm setting out to achieve. And we also know that there's a ton of research out there too that shows us that the beliefs that students hold about their abilities are powerful predictors of the performance that they will actually achieve. So the more that we see belief in our ability to succeed, the more we actually succeed, which is just an amazing iterative and positive cycle to help our students engage in. Further, the empowerment piece of this particular strategy is all about alignment. It really helps students see that goal, what we're aiming for, or those expected behaviors that are provided to us in a particular circumstance or situation, and it helps us align our thinking and our behavior to those. And so this is a really powerful formative strategy. We have to, in order to engage in that present to future orientation, where am I now relative to where I need to be, helps us understand how we close the gap and get there. And then the last piece that I want to share with you is what we know from research. If you attended my last video in this series, then you already know what the greatest predictor of future success is. The greatest predictor of future success is past success. Success breeds success. We know that when we experience success, there are a number of internal things that happen that drive the success forward. We already talked a little bit about motivation. Motivation goes up, confidence goes up, effort goes up, perseverance goes up, willingness to take risks, healthy risks goes up. And so when we get success, we're drawn to get more success. And then the more success we get, it's just that cycle that continues to compound. So I want us to just revisit for a moment where we were aiming. In the beginning of the session, I shared with you that I wanted us to think about how we can build some particular critical thinking skills that will help students engage in self-direction and self-management. In the first part of this video, we really looked at what are the benefits of that. Then we looked at a specific strategy, a pause, think, and act strategy that has some questions and steps that go along with it that support students in concretely learning how to do this process. And then long range, I want you to think about how are you making room in your lesson plans and in the kind of cognitive coaching that you do for students to help cultivate these kinds of thinking and behaving skills that we want to see. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope that you have learned something that will support you in this digital landscape and something that you can apply once you're back in your brick and mortar classrooms. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below this video. You can also tweet at me at BrookeMabry21. And you can also tag us in your social posts. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at NWEA. Let us know what kind of problems you're facing. Let us know how you're using these strategies. Let us know what kind of recordings you'd like to see in the future. Reach out and engage with us. We're here to support you. Together, we're better. Teachers are some of the most tenacious and persevering individuals that I've ever known. And I just want to thank you for the good work that you're doing for students. I want to thank you for being a part of our community and letting us partner with you to help all of your students learn and grow. Until next time, be sure to subscribe so that you'll be alerted at the next video in this series. We'll see you soon.